Now I'm calling on Hilary from Business Insider. Hilary, if you can hear us and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Great. Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to talk about a couple of new reports coming out of France and Florida, some new evidence in scientific journals and via public health departments that there might have been some of the first COVID cases in those places as early as late December. And I'm wondering if, kind of given the speed of global travel these days, if you think countries around the world might have taken a more aggressive approach to some early testing and assumed the virus might have been spreading in their countries earlier.
Thanks for this question. I'm not aware of the report from Florida that you mentioned, but I am aware of the a recent paper that came out. It was published yesterday or overnight on a sample from an individual that tested positive by PCR for now known as COVID-19 on December 27th. In this paper, the authors themselves say that it could be a false positive, but assuming it's not, it is possible that this individual may have had COVID-19 in December. This was about a month before the first cases were reported in France. We need more information about this particular case, if this is a case, to find out the different types of history that this individual may have had. It is possible that there could have been a case in France as early as December. The first symptom onset of the cluster in Wuhan was on the 1st of December. So it is possible that someone may have traveled from Wuhan in the month of December and traveled to other locations, but I don't want to speculate. It's really important that we look further into this. The second thing to mention is that some countries are now utilizing their influenza-like illness and their severe acute respiratory illness surveillance system, which has been established across more than 100 countries for influenza. And they're using those samples prospectively. It started in week 9 of this year and is happening now. And they're testing a subset of those for COVID-19. And that's important because you look for additional cases. Some countries may look backwards and may look at some of those samples that were stored in January or in December and may retest those. So it's possible that we may see some of those samples testing positive for COVID-19, but we need more information from the countries. We need to understand why this individual was tested and how this individual was tested before we can really put this into context.
And if I could supplement, in terms of understanding emerging diseases and new pathogens, what very often happens is that usually astute clinicians or others notice something unusual. They either notice an unusual syndrome. Atypical pneumonia, for example, is not an unusual syndrome. It wouldn't trigger necessarily the system to think there was something wrong. But as happened in Wuhan, the clustering of cases of atypical pneumonia, where the testing that was done was negative for the normal pathogens that you would test for. So you end up in this situation where a group of clinicians looking at cases say, well, we know what this is not, but we don't know what this is. But we still have this cluster of disease that look very similar. And that's what triggers the reaction to say, is this something new? Is there something wrong? And that it's usually a cluster of disease that looks alike. And very often when you then find a test and you go back, you find that not all of the people had that disease. The testing then subsequently confirms only a proportion of them. So when you detect an unusual cluster, what you do is try and find every case of disease, undiagnosed disease, that looks like this, and then you develop a test or find the virus and you go back and test. And that's why some of the cases in China have dates of onset that go back to early December, because as they went and looked at this cluster of disease, and then they go back and test and they say, when was your onset? And the person says, I got sick on the 1st or 2nd of December. But they may have been part of a cluster that was detected at the end of December. So it's not that that person was detected as an unusual case on the first day. They were detected as part of an overall cluster. So from that perspective, it's important to recognize that. In this particular case, I think the clinicians in France and other places very often will do this, and we think this is a very prudent approach. If you have someone with a serious illness and you can't make the diagnosis, very often hospitals will freeze samples as a standard practice, which allows them to come back later and do further diagnostic tests should diagnosis or a new virus or anything else emerge. So it's very prudent that that is done. We look forward to any further examinations that are done by other researchers around the world who may find similar cases. So this is a good thing to do. It's something I think we'll look forward to the peer review publications where we can see that these tests are validated and we can discuss the implications of those results.